Well, first of all, I just want to commend all of you for taking the time to be here today. All of us here today were once in your shoes, all of our speakers, so we know that overwhelming feeling of how do I help my child? So I just want to start out by telling you a little bit about our family. I'm a single mom. I have 4 kids. They are 15, 12, 9, and 5. Our family deals with symptoms of ADHD, autism, Tourette's, seizures, dyslexia, and food allergies. Our family started the Feingold diet for my oldest when he was 4.5. And if you've read my book, then you know that my son was completely out of control the first 4 years of his life and drove me absolutely crazy. The hyperactivity with him was just the tip of the iceberg. He had horrible tantrums. He couldn't listen at all. He could not sit still. He couldn't follow directions. He just had zero self-control and was extremely impulsive and extremely talkative. I never let him play with other kids without keeping a close eye on him because I was just afraid he would hurt other kids. And it wasn't that he was a bad kid. He just had no control over his actions. I remember in preschool one time, he was arguing with another child over some blocks, and he accidentally punched the boy in the nose and gave him a bloody nose. So you can imagine how I felt bringing him to school every day. I dreaded taking him anywhere. He was just too much of a handful. So any onlooker would look at him and say he needed a good spanking or some discipline. My parents gave me the book, Dare to Discipline. I read it, and I tried to implement the things in the book, but nothing worked. I was more discouraged than I was before, and I felt like a terrible parent. There was not a book or discipline tactic that worked on my son. As his mom, it just seemed to me like he couldn't help it, like he wanted to behave, but he just couldn't. And the tantrums he would have were unreal. It was exhausting for me trying to contain him. Sometimes I would just put him in his room and hold the door shut until he could calm down, just so that he wouldn't hurt me or the baby. I would just sit there and cry as I could just hear him running back and forth and kicking and punching the walls and screaming. As a young mom with 2 kids at the time, I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and often in tears over his behavior. I just didn't understand why he couldn't behave. At that time, I had no clue that food could affect his behavior. When he was 4, I finally said, enough is enough, and I have to do something or he's going to get kicked out of school. So I decided to just Google hyperactivity and dyes. In my search, I came across the Feingold diet. I knew that my son had ADHD, there was no question. It seemed like a joke to even think of having him tested. At first, I was skeptical of Feingold, the program, because I didn't want to pay the then $75 for a membership to find out what foods had dyes and artificial ingredients. I thought, I can read labels. So I just tried avoiding dyes as best we could, which meant we didn't avoid them completely. We did see some improvements, but it really wasn't enough. His preschool teacher wrote in big red letters on his report card, red flags for ADHD. So about 6 months after removing dyes, I was desperate, and I decided to just take the plunge and order Feingold. So I ordered the program and stuck to the shopping guide. Within 2 days, we saw a complete turnaround in my son. I was blown away. This kid that couldn't stop running suddenly was walking. The kid that couldn't sit still stopped fidgeting, and he could look me in the eye for the first time. Tantrums became a thing of the past for the most part. If I said no to something, he could accept that and move on with little fuss. One day he went to our neighbor's house to play Play-Doh, and the mom commented that this was the first time they had played nicely, and she didn't have to step in. We visited his old babysitter, and she asked me if he was sick, because he wasn't running around and talking incessantly like usual. He was just standing there listening to us talk without interrupting. At a family party, somebody asked me, "What did you do with him? He's so calm now." In kindergarten the following year, his teacher had nothing but glowing reports. In disbelief, I asked her if he had any behavioral problems in school. She said no. I told her how his preschool teacher told me that she saw red flags for ADHD. She looked confused and said she saw no signs of ADHD. In first grade, he won awards for his good behavior and social skills and excellent work habits. I wanted to frame them. We just laughed at what a far cry this was from just 2 years earlier. How could such a simple thing, such as dyes, artificial flavors, and preservatives that are FDA approved, cause such extreme behavior issues? Immediately, I wanted every parent to know about this diet. Had I known about this or learned this in my prenatal classes, it could have saved us 4 years of total chaos and frustration. I didn't want other families to suffer needlessly because of the lack of knowledge of what these chemicals can do to a child. So, what exactly is the Feingold diet? Well, let's start with who Dr. Feingold was. The Feingold diet originated in the 70s with Dr. Ben Feingold, who was, among other things, the chief of pediatrics. He did research that showed that people who avoided these particularly offensive additives, the dyes, artificial flavors, and preservatives, and also avoided foods high in salicylates, often found that their unwanted symptoms disappeared. He found the diet to be particularly helpful for those with ADHD-like symptoms. So the Feingold diet is best known as an ADHD diet, and that's not to say that it doesn't help other symptoms beyond ADHD. It also helps autism, learning disabilities, sleep disorders, allergies, asthma, Tourette's syndrome, hives, eczema, bedwetting, and more. So the Feingold diet does not cut out processed foods. The basis of the Feingold diet is avoiding what I like to call the big three, which are dyes, artificial flavors, and preservatives. So these three groups of chemicals, they're derived from coal tar and petroleum-based substances. And there are a few other additives that Feingold lists out, but they leave it up to the parent to decide if they want to avoid that or not. So things like corn syrup, MSG, GMOs, nitrates. Most parents will start out with just removing the big three, and then later, once they've kind of gotten a handle on the diet, parents usually go further and remove other additives. And Feingold does list this out in their shopping guide. And I actually have one of their shopping guides, it's just my personal copy, back on my table. So on stage 1 of the diet, you'll also eliminate foods high in salicylates. And I'll go into that further in a few minutes. And this slide just shows a copy of the magnet that I offer on my website. And then you also all got one of these in your conference bags today. It's just a good reminder and a good way to keep family members aware of what foods your child needs to avoid. So, and Feingold also helps you avoid these chemicals in non-food items. So things like laundry detergents, soaps, lotions, and personal care items, which many people don't even think about, but anything that you put on your skin does get absorbed right into the bloodstream. So things like tattoos, hand stamps, finger paints, markers are all things that we try to avoid as best we can. And we have a lot of vendors here today, like Acure Organics, that sell products that are without these chemicals. So, seems pretty simple at first glance, and you might think that you can just read labels to avoid these ingredients. Well, the problem with food companies is that they can hide these ingredients under different names or within another ingredient like natural flavors. Or they can spray the packaging with a preservative and don't list this on their ingredients. This is a common practice with cereals or cartons of milk. There are a number of labeling loopholes that manufacturers take full advantage of. So while you may think that you're feeding your child a food that is clean, you may unknowingly be feeding them a food with preservatives or another additive, which could be making their symptoms worse. So for example, here's a box of gluten-free rice Chex. So reading the front of the box, they claim simply nutritious, no artificial colors, flavors, or high fructose corn syrup, and gluten-free. So that sounds good, right? But when we take a look at the label, we see that BHT is added to preserve freshness. And other cereals don't even list this on their ingredients, but they're spraying the inside of the bags with BHT, which seeps right into the food. So that's what's nice about Feingold, is that they research this with manufacturers to find out who's using that in their products. And unfortunately, even organic products are not immune to this problem. I contacted a manufacturer of organic rice milk a couple of years ago and asked whether they or their suppliers use preservatives. They got back to me in a couple weeks and they said yes, their supplier did in fact use BHA to preserve the vitamin A palmitate. And this of course was not listed on the ingredients. So this is where Feingold is helpful. And then now to the next slide. So what's so wrong with these additives then? So many people think that if the FDA has approved these foods, then they must be safe for consumption. Well, here I've bullet pointed some of the potential effects of dyes. Organ damage, cancer, birth defects, allergic reactions such as hives, and hyperactivity. In kids, the most prominent effect we see is hyperactivity and behavioral issues, such as inability to concentrate, constant motion, disruptive behaviors, excessive talking, aggression, excessive touching, irritability, and meltdowns. So basically all the things I was seeing in my son. These chemicals can also cause physical issues, such as difficulty sleeping, nightmares, headaches, stomach aches, hives, asthma, daytime and nighttime wetting, motor and vocal tics, and more. Our bodies don't recognize these chemicals as food. They see these chemicals as invaders, and they treat them as such. So this can put an unnecessary burden on the liver. So instead of the body going after the bacteria, the viruses, the precancerous cells, the liver's having to eliminate the toxins that we're ingesting via our food. And as well, these chemicals interact with the natural chemicals in our brains, such as the serotonin and dopamine, which we're seeing so rampantly in our kids today. And the use of food dyes has increased 500% since the 1950s. So back then, people ate most of their meals at home, and many of the meals were made from scratch using whole foods. The FDA has limits on the amount of carcinogens allowed to be used in one individual dye, but there are no guidelines on the total amount of these products to consume each day. So what amount of dyes can be safely ingested each day? And what if your child is eating multiple dye-laden products each day, and what if they do that for years? There's no long-term studies that have been done on the long-term effects of ingesting dyes. And here's just one little fact that many people may not realize. Many medications used to treat ADHD, such as Adderall here, contain dyes, which can cause the very same symptoms that you're trying to eradicate. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about how you can avoid dyes in medications. And for preservatives, according to one article, BHA is banned in England because research shows that it reacts with other ingested substances to cause the formation of carcinogens. BHA is listed as a carcinogen in the state of California because it causes cancer in humans. BHA has been banned in Japan because it has found to cause cancerous tumors in rats' stomachs. And both BHA and BHT are toxic to the liver and kidneys. Both these preservatives were originally developed to serve as a preservative for petroleum. In the 1950s, they were approved for use in food. They're mostly used to preserve fats and oils. So you'll find it in a lot of like crackers and different things that use oils. TBHQ was approved for use in the early 2000s. So this is a newer preservative. And as a side note, you'll notice that a lot of these additives were added to our food supply. Were not added to our food supply until like the last 50 or 60 years. So you may have some very well-intentioned grandparents make a comment like, when I was a kid, no one had food allergies or ADHD or autism. Well, a lot has changed in our food supply in the last 50 years. So for TBHQ, this is another chemical that is derived from petroleum, and it's a form of butane. So the thing that you put in your grills. TBHQ is being used more and more since the state's starting putting bans on trans fats. So now, in order to preserve the foods and extend their shelf life, food manufacturers are often using TBHQ instead. So restaurants like McDonald's are cooking their fries and chicken nuggets in oils preserved with TBHQ. So as I mentioned earlier, if your child needs to take medication or antibiotics, there are ways to get around dyes. First, you can ask your doctor to write a prescription for meds without dyes. Many times, they will have to write the prescription for a white tablet, which you can crush up, or for capsules that you can then open up and then dump into food or juice, and then talk with your doctor on the proper dose if you do it that way. You can also transfer the contents of a dyed capsule into a clear veggie cap, which you can find at your local health food store. Because a lot of times the dye is contained just in that capsule. And if your child needs a liquid, the other option is to go to a compounding pharmacy and ask them to make the prescription without dyes or artificial flavors. And then now I just wanted to give some general tips for avoiding the big three. I think if there's one piece of advice that I would give to someone that's just starting out on a special diet is to freeze everything. I think that's like the first thing you learn on Feingold. We freeze cupcakes for birthday parties. I frost the cupcakes and then I put them on a plate and let them set in the freezer for about an hour, and then I just transfer them to large Ziploc freezer bags. We make our own popsicles with fruit juice or sometimes smoothies, and they have some really cool popsicle molds that you can find on Amazon. We also freeze pancakes, French toast, muffins, soups, granola bars, cookies, homemade chocolate candy, which is really easy to make. There's a recipe for the chocolate chip granola bars in the conference brochure. And then for school, if your school allows treats, you can leave candy with the teacher for treats, or put something into the school's freezer that you can leave there for when they might have treats unexpectedly. We usually would send cupcakes, cookies, or donuts to keep in the freezer for my kids. And if your child has an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, you can ask that your child's special diet be written into the IEP and state that no food should be given to your child that wasn't brought from home. So basically, you just want to plan ahead and always be prepared. So as I mentioned earlier, foods high in salicylates or sals are avoided in stage 1 of the diet. Salicylates are just one type of phenol. They're the natural chemicals that plants produce to ward off bugs and diseases. So some fruits and vegetables are higher in sals than others, and dyes are a form of salicylate radical. Reactions from sals can be very similar to that of dyes. So often the kids that have strong reactions to dyes are the same kids that will have a reaction to salicylates because they're both a form of salicylate. So why are salicylates a problem for some kids? I know eliminating fruits and vegetables is a big hurdle for many to overcome when considering the Feingold diet, because we all grew up believing and being told that fruits and vegetables were good for us, and they are, which is why we're going to teach you today how you can help your child move beyond stage 1, and not just eliminate certain foods, but eliminate those food sensitivities. And not every child will have a salicylate sensitivity, so it's possible that your child may improve just by removing the big three. And salicylate sensitivity can occur for a few reasons, one of them being low levels of PST enzymes in the liver. Dr. at the University of Birmingham conducted research showing that kids with autism often have low levels of the enzyme PST. Low levels often coexist with low levels of sulfates. Sulfates are a key tool in the detoxification process and in breaking down phenols and salicylates. So without normal levels of sulfates, the PST enzyme can't metabolize salicylates. So what that means is the body just has a hard time processing salicylates and eliminating them from the body. And then the body has an immune type reaction to these natural chemicals. So what causes low PST? One reason is because of the toxins in the big three. Dyes, artificial flavors, and preservatives all have been shown to lower PST enzymes. This is why you'll often see kids' sensitivities to sals improve the longer they've been on the Feingold diet. By not eating the big three every day, they're no longer reducing the production of PST enzymes, which they need to process sals. The second reason is due to leaky gut syndrome. So just like gluten and dairy, when these particles and natural chemicals enter the bloodstream through tiny holes in the gut, it triggers an immune system response, leading to a salicylate intolerance. If you heal the gut, you will also help heal food sensitivities, and that's the goal. You don't want to be on stage 1 forever, because in general, fruits are good for you. It's just that some kids can't process them properly, the sals. Removing gluten and dairy is sometimes necessary to heal the gut. And then the third reason for sal sensitivity is due to yeast or candida. Yeast overgrowth often coincides with sal sensitivity and leaky guts. So for my kids, sals would cause motor and vocal tics or Tourette's. When we treated for yeast and removed the high sal foods, the tics would stop. The fruits that are highest in sals are many of the same fruits that feed yeast. So when you do stage 1, you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. Yeast also contributes to leaky gut, which Kathleen will be talking about further this afternoon. So how do we help our kids eliminate their cell sensitivity? So as I mentioned, over time, especially if you heal the leaky gut and yeast overgrowth, kids can get better with this. Eating cells in moderation can help, especially when you're not processing them properly. So at our house, most of us eat cells in moderation, as getting a handle on yeast and leaky gut is kind of an ongoing process for us and then also for many people. It definitely takes some time and effort. Dr. Waring's research also showed that Epsom salt baths and supplementing with magnesium helped with sulfation and detoxification process of salts and phenols. Epsom salt contains magnesium sulfate, which your body absorbs through the skin in the bath. So we add about a cup of Epsom salt to the bath every day, and you can start with less. I think we started with about 1/4 of a cup, and then we worked up to that. Epsom salt baths are also great for promoting relaxation, as it helps the body get rid of toxins and just opens up those detox pathways. So for a lot of people on Feingold, it's like if their kid eats off diet, they're like, get them into an Epsom salt bath immediately. If you have an older child that doesn't take baths anymore, there's Epsom salt creams or lotions you can buy that you can rub on their skin, or you can have them soak their feet in a foot bath with Epsom salt. And lastly, digestive enzymes, targeted to help the body break down salts and phenols, such as No Phenol by Houston Enzymes and Phenol Assist by Kirkman's. These can sometimes be helpful. I remember when we first started Feingold, we would use the No Phenol chewable tablets for any time my son accidentally ate off diet, and it would help with the reactions. And you can call Houston Enzymes, and they'll mail you free samples if you want to try them out. These can be helpful for some kids. I think it helps with the processing of them, but for my kids, it's like they still reacted to the cells in the same way, so we really only use the enzymes on occasion to help with reactions. But some people do find that they're very helpful, so it kind of is just trial and error. So how do you know if your child has an issue with cells? Not every child will react to cells, and really the only way to know is to remove the cells for a time and then watch for a reaction when you reintroduce them. So this is the basis of stage 1 of the Feingold diet. Feingold recommends removing high cells for at least 6 to 8 weeks. So some reactions will occur immediately after consuming the high cells, and some could occur up to 2 to 3 days later. The most common reactions are dark circles under the eyes, irritability or moodiness, meltdowns, reddening of the face or ears, aggression, bladder incontinence, inability to concentrate, night waking, vocal and motor tics, as seen with Tourette syndrome, and difficulty falling asleep, and then hyperactivity as well. The most common reactions that moms on Feingold see are aggression, red ears, and hyperactivity. So those are just some things that those signs that you can look for that helps you know, like, is my child having a problem metabolizing the salicylates properly? In adults, the most common reaction is extreme or chronic fatigue. In my kids, we would see aggression at the younger ages, excuse me, especially biting around the toddler years. Excuse me. And for my son, it wasn't just the occasional biting. This would be about 50 times a day. I could not leave him alone for a minute when he was around 2. He would just go after his siblings and just want to bite everyone. And then I remember getting him called out of the church nursery for like a couple weeks in a row, and I'm like, what's going on for him just acting out and being aggressive? We finally figured out that it was from the blueberry breakfast bar that I was giving him every Sunday right before church, not realizing that he too had an issue with cells. So as soon as we pulled the breakfast bars, he immediately stopped biting, so that was a huge clue. For my daughter who has autism, cells would cause meltdowns and then later an inability to focus or concentrate in school as she got older. For my older son, cells caused various vocal and motor tics. So for about 3 months, he chewed on all of his shirt collars and clothes. This can also be a sign of zinc deficiency, but we saw no change after giving him zinc. So finally, I figured out that there were apples in the breakfast bars that he was eating every day. Sometimes he would blink really hard, or he would cough habitually. open and close his mouth repeatedly or make strange noises or tap on everything. So as soon as we pulled the cells, the tics would immediately stop. So again, just watch for those symptoms, and a lot of it is like trial and error and keeping a good food log and keeping track of things. But as soon as if we would reintroduce the cells, the tics would return immediately. So this is why Feingold is so helpful, because they will research all the ingredients and find out if cells are used within the ingredients. So even if it's like within the natural flavors, even that small amount was enough to trigger the tics and the aggression in my kids. And cells can have a build-up effect as well. So your child may not react right away from eating them, but if they're eating them frequently, they may suddenly have a build-up reaction a couple days or a few days later. So I personally believe that if you have a child that is struggling with ADHD, that Feingold should be your first step. So many kids with ADHD react to dyes and the big three, as well as salicylates. So before moving on to bigger, harder, and more expensive things, I would consider trying Feingold first. And each child is different. For my oldest, Feingold was enough. And if you do nothing else, I recommend removing dyes as a bare minimum. So Feingold, I think, is ideal for those who have made no dietary changes yet and are just eating the standard American diet, because Feingold will provide you that list of which foods are without the big three. So it just kind of makes your life a little easier. So this kind of just allows your family to transition into a healthier way of eating without a huge disruption in your daily routines. So instead of eating Doritos, you can opt for late July corn chips, or instead of the Haribo gummy bears, you can get some Surf Sweet gummy bears. Annie's mac and cheese instead of Kraft. It's really just about switching brands and knowing which ones are without the big three. And then if you need to cut out cells for a while, they'll also provide that list for you. And when you do introduce staged foods, I always recommend trying organic fruits first, just to see if maybe the pesticides could be part of the issue as well, and which Esther will be talking about next. So for my other kids, Feingold alone was not enough. 4 years after starting Feingold, my third child was 12 months old. He had his first grand mal febrile seizure, spiking a fever of over 104 out of nowhere. This was subsequently around the same time that I started giving him dairy products and more table foods like breads and pastas for the first time. The doctors told us it was a fluke and nothing to worry about. But 4 months later, he had another grand mal seizure. Again, I was told there was nothing I could do about it. Well, I didn't like that answer. I was not going to sit around and wait for his next seizure. So I remembered watching Jenny McCarthy on Oprah talking about doing a gluten and dairy-free diet for her son, who had seizures. So I immediately went out and bought her book and read it in one night. And the next day I started both my son and my daughter, who showed signs of autism, on a GFCF diet cold turkey. Since my son was still sick, I just used whatever we had in the house that didn't contain gluten or dairy. So I stuck to the basics, the meats, fruits, vegetables, until I could get a handle on how to avoid gluten and dairy in processed foods. So I started my daughter on the GFCF diet as well, because I had heard over and over on the Feingold boards that removing gluten and dairy could be really helpful for kids with autism. However, I was too afraid to try it. I just kept thinking, what would she eat? All she eats is gluten and dairy. So I had no idea where to even start. So when my son started having seizures, I felt like this was God's way of saying or shouting, enough is enough, just try the diet. So my daughter was 4.5 at that time and had been diagnosed with hypotonia or low muscle tone. She had been in early childhood at school since she was 3 and was taking speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy. She had trouble walking even short distances without getting tired. I had to carry her up the stairs every night because she didn't have enough energy to walk up the stairs. Every time we went out, she would insist on sitting in the stroller or the shopping cart. And since my oldest child was such a whirlwind of energy as a toddler, this was a welcome change. But by the time she was 3, the extreme lethargy just started to concern me. She also had limited spontaneous speech and was showing signs of autism. Just 3 days after starting the GFCF diet, my daughter came alive. It was like she was noticing her world around her for the first time. Her speech and cognitive functions improved. She rode her bike to school for the first time, which was huge for her. She stopped to point out the shiny spokes on her bikes and the ducks in the pond. I had never heard her talk so much in her whole life. It was like she had never seen these things before, but yet she had. We went to the grocery store, and instead of asking to sit in the cart, she wanted to walk. Except she ran. Down another aisle, laughing as she ran. I looked at my older son, and we just laughed and chased her. And I'd never been so happy to chase one of my children through a store. So removing gluten and dairy caused her energy levels to soar. She also, as a baby, used to be sick all the time. It seems like every 2 weeks she had a cold or a runny nose. She also had watery eyes constantly. Once we started GFCF, the runny nose and frequent colds stopped. She improved cognitively. At school, she used to have to draw in her weekend journal every Monday, and every week she would just scribble lines. After starting the diet, she drew an actual picture of a sunflower, grass, the sky, the sun, and everything was colored appropriately as well. And we had never seen her draw anything like that before. For my toddler, the seizures stopped, as did the unexplained fevers that lasted several days. He went back to being healthy, as he was prior to age 1. I was nursing him at the time, so I also had to go GFCF. If I ate gluten and dairy, it would pass through the breast milk and he would have absence seizures. This also happened periodically if he got an occasional food with gluten or dairy, which happened at the church nursery. Usually right after he fell asleep, he would suddenly jerk and raise his fists in the air and start shaking his arms. He would do this probably about 50 times on and off before stopping. So I didn't get much sleep during those days, afraid he would have another grand mal seizure. When he was 3.5, we decided to test him out and see, maybe he outgrew his allergies. So probably over a month, we started giving him just small amounts of gluten and dairy. And at first, we didn't see much change, and we thought, well, maybe he can tolerate these foods again. However, within a month, he got the same unexplained fever with no other symptoms and started having a grand mal seizure. This time I knew what to do. We stripped his clothes, gave him some Motrin, and we didn't need to call the ambulance. Again, the fever lasted a few days, and he developed a cold. So we decided to keep him on the GFCF diet. At 5, out of my care, he was being fed gluten and dairy again. And then, again, the fever spiked out of nowhere. Around age 7, he developed an unexplained low-grade fever for about 5 days and severe leg pains. He missed 5 days of school because he was in too much pain to walk. And this was at the time, too, that he was being fed gluten and dairy. So in my kid's case, gluten and dairy can affect everyone differently. So, and also how it affects your child can change over time. So now my son doesn't have seizures anymore, but he'll get the leg pains, and then occasional, he might get sick with colds and stuff. But for the most part, we try to keep him on a GFCF. For myself, when I started GFCF, because I was nursing my son, I also noticed improvements. After suffering from migraines since I was about 8, my migraines immediately stopped. In high school, I got migraines at least once every week or two. I had no idea what they were from. Today, I know I get headaches from dairy. And for me, the headaches come about 2 to 4 days after I have dairy. And my son is the same way. It's almost, 2 days exactly after if he has dairy, my oldest son. Gluten also makes me extremely bloated and severely tired the following day. And like 2 of my kids, I can feel it in my legs when I eat gluten. So when I'm walking up the stairs, my muscles will get very fatigued. And by the time I get to the top, I'm I can totally feel it. And then other days when I'm not eating gluten, I have no problem and my energy levels are much higher. My oldest, who is not on a gluten and dairy-free diet, but does have to limit his dairy intake, when he was a baby, he got ear infections from dairy. He got his first ear infection within days of starting on milk when he was around 1. After 4 consecutive ear infections in 4 months, I decided to take him off milk, much to my doctor's dismay. That was the last ear infection he ever had, and he's now 15. Later, when he was 3, he started getting migraines from dairy. We had stopped giving him cow's milk, but we didn't eliminate any other forms of dairy. So I finally figured out that it was the cheese sticks that he was eating that was giving him headaches. So we cut way back on dairy for him. So that's how our family reacts to these foods, and of course every person is different. And I'm often asked, which diet should I do for my child, Feingold or GFCF? I always say to at least avoid the big 3, no matter which diet you do. And if you have a child with ADHD, I recommend doing the full Feingold program starting at stage 1. If you have a child with autism, I recommend avoiding the big three and also doing a GFCF diet. And if you're here for Autism 1, I don't think there's a person that you'll meet that has recovered their child from autism who isn't doing a GFCF diet. It's just so helpful for kids with autism because most of them are dealing with leaky guts and immune issues. And then avoiding sals can be helpful for kids with autism, especially when dealing with meltdowns or aggression. So I see a lot of people want to jump right into GFCF for their kids with ADHD because they may not be seeing immediate results with whatever they're doing with their kids. With Feingold, I think the main reason if you're not seeing results is probably because you're not following the diet 100%, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It probably took us a good 6 months before we really got the diet down and figured out what my son's triggers were. Corn syrup is one thing that is allowed on the Feingold diet, but it was something that caused major aggression and moodiness for my son. Chocolate did as well. Had we not figured those triggers out via a food journal, I may have thought that we needed to go beyond Feingold right away. So I personally would give Feingold a good 6 months before removing gluten and dairy, unless you're seeing some physical symptoms as well. Now, don't get me wrong, there are good reasons for everyone to avoid gluten and dairy, and I wish I had more time to get into the why they're so problematic, but I say to give Feingold 6 months because for most people, Feingold alone is very hard to implement, and many times spouses aren't supportive of any diet change, and it does get much easier once you get used to it. But I know for myself, had I had to implement Feingold and GFCF at the same time, starting from where we were at, which was a lot of fast food and convenience items, I probably would have given up. I've never seen anyone take on a new diet and not be overwhelmed at first. So I would rather see someone take it step by step and be successful than try to do everything all at once and be so overwhelmed that they give up. And that's just my opinion from talking to so many people that email me and from reading on Facebook groups every day for the last 10 or so years. You'll also figure out what things are the biggest issues for your child when you implement one thing at a time. So the most common physical symptoms that might indicate a gluten and dairy intolerance include digestive issues such as constipation or diarrhea. I think that's one huge clue whenever I hear parents talking about that. Most often gluten will cause constipation and dairy will cause diarrhea, but it can be different for everyone, and sometimes you're going to see a combination of both. Headaches or stomach aches that don't resolve on the Feingold diet, dark circles under the eyes that don't resolve on Feingold stage 1, day or night wetting, frequent runny noses and colds and ear infections are also commonly indicative of a dairy intolerance. And then also any kind of autoimmune disease is very commonly a gluten and dairy intolerance as well. So how do you test for gluten and dairy intolerance? There are some tests you can do, but sometimes the tests aren't accurate. For my kids and myself, we only showed up as mildly allergic to gluten and dairy on food allergy blood test results, but we definitely react to these foods. There's no way we could keep them in our diets just because the test didn't show that we were allergic to them. For food allergy tests, I like Genova or ALA tests. We've used both, and often you need to be eating gluten and dairy in order for the sensitivity to accurately show up. There are other tests that your doctor can run as well, like a gliadin blood test or an intestinal biopsy to check for gut damage. I personally think keeping a diet diary or a food log is the best way to determine food allergies and sensitivities. If you keep the food log long enough, you're going to start to see obvious patterns. So keep track of symptoms, behaviors, and illnesses in the order that you're seeing them throughout the day, right next to the foods that have been eaten. And again here, digestive enzymes can help break down the gluten and dairy so that fewer particles pass through the leaky gut. We use Houston enzymes, AFP or Trienza, for gluten and dairy. The AFP targets gluten and dairy, and then the Trienza targets gluten, dairy, and phenols. And Enzymatica makes another general digestive enzyme that is good, called Digest or Digest Gold, and then Kirkman has some options as well. So while the enzymes help, we still need to avoid gluten and dairy because we still see the same symptoms with or without the enzymes. We find the enzymes are most helpful for when you're eating out or on vacation, when you have less control over gluten and dairy and cross-contamination. So as I shared earlier, we started cold turkey. It's really just a personal choice. Some find it easier to remove dairy first, as dairy is eliminated from the body in 3 days. Gluten can take up to 6 months. So some people choose to wean their kids off gluten and dairy, and that's fine too. I'm personally more of a fan of going cold turkey and getting it over with, and I think it creates less confusion for your child on what they can and can't eat. I highly recommend giving the body time to forget what gluten and dairy tastes like before introducing subs. So if you suddenly give your kid a GFCF pizza or dairy-free cheese sub, I can almost guarantee that they won't like it. It's really something you have to get used to. And in the beginning, your body is going to be going through detox. So they're going to be craving that gluten and dairy and may have some moodiness or ravishing hunger. And this is pretty common. I can speak from experience for that. The same will happen if once you're established on a GFCF diet and you let them eat off diet, they'll have that detox. And the initial detox is a lot worse than after you've been on it for a while and you may just cheat here and there. But it can create some really big mood swings and aggression in your kids to let them yo-yo back and forth. Another thing you can do is just slowly introduce dairy-free milks by mixing half dairy milk and half dairy-free. Or you could even start with like 1/4, just to kind of get your kids slowly used to the taste. And you can do the same thing with gluten-free noodles. So here's some of our favorite dairy-free alternatives. We personally use Earth Balance butter. We also avoid soy. Soy is a hormone disruptor. So we try to limit soy as much as possible, and it's usually, most of soy is GMO as well. So Delicious coconut milks we like, and Pacific rice milk. Daiya cheeses, and then Enjoy Life chocolate chips. And for ice cream, we like So Delicious, Larry and Luna. Luna and Larry is good too. And then for our favorites, gluten-free alternatives. We use the Rudy's original gluten-free bread. D-Land's one, I haven't found it in this area, but I guess in the Connecticut, New York area, they have that if you have an egg sensitivity as well. We like breads from Anna, which is a mix. And then I use a lot of recipes from Cooking for Isaiah, which I really like. She has her own all-purpose flour blend that I pretty much use for everything. And then just a couple more examples on there. I would also check Pinterest and the internet for recipes. I have a lot of our favorite foods listed on my All Natural Mom Pinterest boards. I have it all separated out by like different stores, what we like at each place. Recovering Kids is a great Facebook group. And then TACA also has some great resources, as well as gfcfdiet.com. And for a couple good books, if you want to read more on gluten and dairy, there's Wheat Belly, and then Don't Drink Your Milk. And then my book, All Natural Mom's Guide to the Feingold Diet, explains more about the Feingold diet, kind of go into that further than what I had time for today. And then my next book, which should be out later this year, it's kind of a continuation of the first book, kind of a number 2 to it. It focuses more on the practical implementation of avoiding the big 3, such as how to handle birthday parties, holidays, doctor visits, unsupportive relatives, and the like. So the most important thing when trying to help your kids is to continue to educate yourself. Connect with other parents who are going through the same thing and learn from them. And to end my presentation and to start off our conference, I wanted to read something that another Feingold mom named Mindy wrote just this week. And this was on the Feingold member Facebook group. So this was addressed to Feingold newbies. But I think this really sums up really well just my own journey in healing my kids. I am just forever grateful for the moms who have selflessly shared information with me so that I could help my kids. And at this conference, we hope to do the same for all of you. So Mindy said, for those of you just starting out on your Feingold journey, this Facebook group will become your lifeline. Use the knowledge of our past mistakes, all our trials and errors, and the countless hours of research we have done to make your start on this journey and your lives easier. When you think you are alone on this journey, or you are at your wit's end and ready to give up, know that we will be there to help you figure things out and to navigate your way through this. You are not alone. Trust me when I say we have been there, done that, and that we understand. Because we have been there, we have done that, and we do understand. On your worst days, we will be there to hold your hand and wipe your tears whenever you need it. Vent, rant, scream, shout, cry away to us. You will always have someone supporting you in this group 24/7. You are not alone. On your best days, we will be the loudest cheering squad you could ever imagine. We will celebrate every single one of your accomplishments and successes as if we were besties and families, because that is exactly what we all have become, family. Know that when you have a question, we will answer it. You may not like what we say sometimes. You may want to sugarcoat things when we don't, but we will answer all your questions honestly and without judgment. We all know what it is like to be judged on a daily basis. The goal of this group is to lift you up, not tear you down. You are not alone. So, thank you. I have a few more minutes if anyone has any questions that they want to ask. Did my son ever do medication? No. He was 4.5 at the time, so it was something that I didn't even consider. I was like, he's way too young, So I just kind of started looking into the natural things first. And when we tried Feingold, it worked so quickly. It was like, we really didn't need to go that route. Yeah, the question is, do people tolerate raw dairy better? Yes, I think so. The way milk is processed today, it's so different than, raw milk. So yes, many people, if you can, but there are a lot of kids that they need to heal that leaky gut first. But it is something that you can try. Some people do fine with raw. It's hard to find raw dairy, so I think that's why a lot of people don't use it. But yeah, it's something that you can try and see if that works for your child. Okay, so the question was, if someone's already on the Feingold diet, what kind of things in my book would be helpful? I think a lot of people that have read it that are already on the diet, I think it's very comforting for them to know, okay, I'm not alone, and to hear our story. They see their own kids in that. And then I kind of go into more details. So they'll say I would have never learned all this stuff just from the membership materials. So I kind of give a lot of tips and things that you'll learn. If you're on the Feingold boards for a while and reading, you'll pick up on this stuff, but it's going to take you a while of reading. So I kind of took all of that and put that in my book. So all of the questions that repeatedly come up on the Facebook groups are questions that I've answered. And then my second book I think will be more helpful for people that are already on Feingold. So it's kind of just tips on how to what do we do for doctor's visits? How do we avoid dyes? How do we deal with unsupportive relatives? Because that's something that we all deal with when we're doing a special diet. The question is, do I feel like my kids tolerate Sal's more now? Yes, definitely. So for my son that we started the diet for, we did stay stage 1 pretty strictly for, I want to say 4 years. He had so many, it would cause tics for him. So it was I'd get, the teacher would be he's tapping on everything. He's annoying the kids. So we would stay more stricter. More in the summer, we would go off diet a little bit more on the Sal's part of it. But definitely he's 15 now, he does fine with that stuff. So once you heal the leaky gut and deal with yeast and other things, and the longer you've been on the diet, those PST enzymes too go back up, so it helps you process those more. Okay, so the question is there a test for leaky gut? I think Kathleen will talk on that. Her whole presentation is on that. But yes, there is, and I'm not sure exactly what the test is, but I remember my holistic doctor did the test, and he's for one of my kids, he said, oh, they don't have a leaky gut. That was my daughter. She did test very high for the one test that tests if she's super sensitive to gluten, which she was. She's almost celiac. But for some reason, he said she didn't have a leaky gut. Some of the signs, if they do much better on a gluten and dairy-free diet, that's a big sign that they probably have leaky gut. And then also when they eat gluten and dairy, if you see them big reactions like hyperactivity and then aggression and all that, that's another sign too. And then hopefully Kathleen can kind of get into that further. Yeah, the question is, will Feingold help with any other neurological conditions? Yes, definitely. I think it's a good start, but sometimes it depends what kind of neurological conditions. If you've got something that's more severe like autism, Feingold does help with autism, like with my daughter. Definitely the salicylates cause the meltdowns and aggression. But for when you've got more serious stuff going on, most of the time you do need to go gluten and dairy free and just kind of deal with all the other stuff, like is there vitamin deficiencies, which Jen will talk about. So we did all that biomed stuff too. Within a few months after we started gluten and dairy free, we also started doing the vitamins and the biomed stuff with my kids as well, which helped a lot. The question is about MSG. We avoid MSG as well. It's monosodium glutamate. It's a neurotoxin, so I forget which movie it was in. It might be Genetic Roulette, where it's saying that it actually causes like holes in the brain. So my kids will kind of joke about it. They're like, no, I'm gonna get holes in my brain if I eat MSG. Yeah, we avoid it. It's not a good ingredient. It's something that on the Feingold diet, like it is part of their approved list, but in their shopping guide, like in parentheses afterwards, it'll say like if something has MSG or corn syrup or nitrates, a few of the extra things. Yeah, do we have any reactions to MSG? Yes, I would say headaches is the biggest thing that we've seen. Yeah, it is hidden under a lot of ingredients. That's why I like the Feingold diet, because we want to avoid MSG, and it's hard. It's like it could be hidden in yeast extracts. There's a bunch of different names. Natural flavors, there's a lot of loopholes that they can hide different ingredients under. So it's not enough just to read labels, unfortunately. The question was, did I take my kids to an allergist to get tested? No, our holistic doctor was Dr. Hicks, and unfortunately he passed away last month, so we were very upset. He's been treating us for 8 years. So we went through a holistic doctor. So these tests that we listed, your regular doctor isn't going to order those. You're going to have to go through a naturopath or a holistic doctor. And we did the blood tests, which is Genova or ALA tests. And we basically, we went online and ordered the tests, and they were about $150, I think. And then I just had my holistic doctor signed off on it. So you have to have a doctor sign off on it. And then we got the results that way. Yeah. And those food allergy tests, they're good, a guide, but the best way to do is to keep a food log and kind of watch for symptoms, but it does give you some good information. I've just found with gluten and dairy, it's not always super accurate, because my kids obviously react to gluten and dairy, but they don't show up on blood tests all the time. So, okay, I am out of time. Thank you.